Welcome to today's PAVE virtual panel, Reimagining Vehicle Design for the Autonomous Age. For this conversation, we're joined by companies pursuing novel AV designs to explore why they took these new approaches, the advantages they see in rethinking what a vehicle can be, and the challenges that they face in ensuring that such designs comply with existing regulations. My name is Tabitha Colter, and I'm PAVE's Director of Operations and the moderator for this panel. I'll introduce our three guests quickly, and then we'll get started with the conversation. Our first guest is Katie Stevens, Head of State and Local Policy at Nuro. Katie, great to have you with us.
Great, thanks so much, Tabitha, appreciate it.
And our second panelist is Bob Kruyff, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at Local Motors. Bob, thanks for joining.
Great, very excited, thank you.
And last but not least, we have Amanda Prescott, Director of Homologation and Feature Integration at Zoox. Amanda, pleasure to have you.
Excited to be here and looking forward to all the great questions we've received so far.
Absolutely. Now we've brought Amanda, Bob, and Katie on today because each of the three companies they represent are engaged in novel AV designs which present opportunities as well as challenges. So to start off, let's discuss what it even means to talk about a vehicle with a novel design. What is a non-novel design? Amanda?
Thanks so much, Tabitha. Really appreciate it. I think this is a great question. And what I key on in that question is, what is the difference between novel and non-novel? What does that mean in this context? And from my viewpoint, it really means vehicles that have controls for human drivers versus vehicles that do not have controls for human drivers. So here at Zoox, as well as at Nuro and at Local Motors, we're all designing vehicles that do not have human controls. So that's how I bucket them as being novel. The shapes, being what they are, sort of a box, are not that distinct from other vehicle designs like minibuses and whatnot. So I really draw the line at the presence or absence of human controls.
Absolutely. And Katie, what are some of the issues that novel designs are trying to solve?
Yeah, I think for the past several decades, vehicle designs have really prioritized comfort and safety of drivers. So AVs really present an opportunity to completely rethink our vehicles and our relationship to them. And some of the issues inherent with this, our current relationship with personal cars is safety. So 40,000 people die on our roads every year. A lot of these crashes are caused by drunk, drugged, distracted driving. Cost, a personal car is really a significant economic investment for many families, especially given that we hardly use them. Cars are parked 95% of the time and are usually much larger than we actually need. For the standard use, approximately 60% of trips taken are 6 miles or less. And then accessibility, cars have primarily been designed around able-bodied drivers and passengers with limited opportunities for people with disabilities. And then lastly, the environment. So we all know transportation is the #1 contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, but most of the time cars are driving alone. So the vast majority of fleet is still gas powered. EVs really hover only around 1% of new vehicle sales annually. So AVs really present a great opportunity for transformational change in this, how vehicles are designed, how they're used, and how they serve, and who they serve. And it allows us to really rethink our traditional mobility options, disentangling mobility from car ownership and encouraging alternative modes, and really creating a safer, more sustainable, more equitable transportation system.
Thanks, Katie. And Bob, building off of that, what are some general use cases for novel design, and how can they as a category maybe deliver unique benefits that Katie mentioned?
Sure. Well, we call our shuttle a first mile, last mile shuttle. It would be, let's say, an opportunity for people in the retirement community to get to a larger transportation system, like a light rail or a train or something like that. I think of where I live here, we have a nice light rail system that's 5 miles away. And even if I was much younger, I wouldn't walk 5 miles, right, to get to it. So we have retirement communities. We've had great success military bases, getting around, the large, they're almost like small cities. So that's the way I look at, our use cases. We also have a great use case in Yellowstone Park. All the national parks, are extremely worried about traffic pollution and noise. And a shuttle like this allows people to have great visibility, not worry about driving, but get to see the scenery, for example. So it's almost endless, right? Now, these are low-speed shuttles, so we're not going to be on the highway, for example, but they're going to be local. And it allows people who don't want to drive or can't drive anymore to still have a great lifestyle. So that's been one of our focuses.
Definitely. Thank you. That gave a pretty good overview of novel designs as a category. So now I want to get into some fun stuff, which is obviously all three of you have a background that actually shows the vehicle by your organization. So I'd like to give you each a chance now to discuss the novel design of your company's vehicle. So let's start with you, Amanda, and the Zoox vehicle.
Absolutely. So at Zoox, we're super excited to be doing a ground up vehicle that's designed for riders to enjoy and AI to drive. And so we've really characterized our vehicle around delivering an amazing customer experience. So we have our carriage seating design. This allows for socialization within the cabin. It's easier to chat with people if you're all not just staring forward out the windshield. You can sit across from someone and have a nice conversation with them, or you can sit adjacent to them and have a nice conversation. Every rider also gets the exact same experience. We've designed every position in the vehicle to offer all the same features, all the same comforts, so that you're really not trading off. If you think about conventional rideshare and a conventional vehicle, you get jammed in the back of a vehicle. That back seat was probably not really designed to be occupied in a rideshare kind of market. It was for the kids. It was just sort of there in case you had to jam a few extra people in. And so we really think that our design is going to leverage that amazing customer experience. The other thing that it helps is with sharing, with ride sharing, right? For us to succeed on all of our great goals of electrification and reducing pollution and reducing congestion, we really also need to transition to sharing. And by having carriage seating, you have a much wider ingress aisle. So if you are doing pooled rides, when you pull up to the second stop and the doors open, the next person can get in without disturbing the first rider in the vehicle. And we really think that that's something that will become increasingly important as we move and add sharing and pooling to be one of those huge levers for delivering on the future.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Katie, what about Nuro?
Yeah, so Nuro's R2, which you can see behind me, I'll sort of move to the side, is a zero occupant vehicle that only carries goods, so it'll never carry people. You know, a little dissimilar from Bob and Amanda's, but it's designed to really carry the goods and also to protect people that are on the outside, not, versus what's on the inside. So it's smaller and narrower, about half the width of a sedan, meaning it gives more room for cyclists and pedestrians. It has gull wing doors. So they open on the right side, always curbside. So R2 will never door a cyclist and customers can get their goods without stepping into traffic. Has a 360-degree view. So embedded sensor placement creates redundant simultaneous views in all directions. Different types of sensors improve detection of people and objects on the roadway. Sensors include cameras, LiDAR, and short and long range radar and thermal imaging. And then it has a touch screen. So right in that panel, am I doing this right? Right in that panel is a touch screen for customer access or a law enforcement interaction. And to receive your goods, you go and plug in the code, and also has a front crumple zone. So the vehicle sacrifices itself in the event of a collision.
Great, thank you. And Bob, tell us about Local Motors.
Sure. Well, Local Motors is an all-American company. Our engineering and let's say support functions are located in Chandler, Arizona, but our manufacturing is in Knoxville, Tennessee. And there's a reason for that. Ollie is 3D printed, the whole vehicle. Now, you may say, how could you ever do that? But we have the world's largest 3D printer, and the whole upper and lower part of the vehicle is 3D printed. And to add some other features, as you can see behind me here, we have touch screens on the outside and touch screens on the inside. And for, let's say, vehicles that are in tourist situations, we can play, what's good about the local area, whether it's a winery or whatever. So we have a lot of information available. And again, the glass area is very important for us. So people can see what's going on outside and see the sights. So yeah, it's very unique, low step in height. and the seating configuration is again open. I think, as Amanda mentioned, people can get in and out. You don't have to push people out in order to get back in. So I think we share a lot of those attributes. And what I find very interesting, you know, we started independently, but when you look at the commonality between our vehicles, you can see what's important. And that's why ground up vehicle design really, you know, affords taking care of the rider.
That's fascinating. Thank you all for that look.
Sure.
You know, it's been great to kind of hear a little bit about what a novel vehicle design is, hear a little bit about your three organizations going about it. And now I'd like to take it back to a broader look at social impacts surrounding novel designs. So listeners of PAVE may have heard a lot in the past about how automated driving systems could improve safety by reducing human factors such as drunk driving and distraction that often lead to crashes. Why is it also important to think about vehicle design as well with safety? Amanda, could you start us off there?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Zoox, safety is foundational, and we published our second safety report back in June of 2021. You can learn more about some of the 100 innovations that we've packed into our little tiny robot that's a foot shorter than a BMW i3 by going to zoox.com/safety if you'd like to learn more about that. Things that we think about, we break it into sort of three buckets. So driving control, single point failures, and rider protection. So one of the things on driver control that's a little bit interesting to our vehicle is that it's bidirectional. This allows us to always be driving forward, if you will, because we have no front or back and we have the ability to flip our lighting configuration. We can avoid potentially making U-turns or making 3-point turns because we can just pull in forward, but then also pull out forward. And so that's something that we think is going to be really powerful in, you know, minimizing some of those risky maneuvers that conventional vehicles have to make. We've also gone through, and because it's a ground up design, we've designed in redundancy of steering controls, driving controls, so that a single point failure does not result in us losing control of the robot and not being able to navigate to a safe location to kind of resolve whatever the issue is. And then finally, you may have seen we've developed a very novel airbag design because our vehicle has no instrument panel and no steering wheel. So conventional airbag designs would just not work. We have horseshoe airbags. They're big U-shaped airbags that essentially make a capsule around you on your side of the vehicle. Then we have individual frontal airbags, much like you would see in your conventional vehicles, side airbags. And in fact, we also have airbags in the seat pan. So depending on which way you're facing and which direction the crash is coming from, it's important to be able to sort of elevate the knees to control the occupant motion if there is a crash.
Absolutely. Katie, anything to add there about vehicle design and safety?
Yeah, I'll just say, you know, it really does play an important role for people outside of the vehicle, especially for ours, right, where there is no occupant. So these are vulnerable road users like cyclists and pedestrians. This month is National Pedestrian Safety Month. We know deaths have risen, pedestrian deaths have risen 46% in the last 10 years. And vehicle design has played a role in that. So SUV or pickup truck is 2 to 3 times more likely to kill a pedestrian than a sedan. And every day, about 28 people in this country die in drunk driving crashes. That's about a person every 52 minutes. So AVs really allow us to adopt safer vehicle designs that eliminate the driver. And so eliminating the possibility of drunk, drugged, and distracted driving. We actually completed a study, or we worked with Virginia Tech, did a report that found that for every mile of driving replaced by a zero occupant vehicle like R2, the risk of fatality or injury can be reduced by approximately 60% for reasons like it being occupantless, for reasons like, you know, having a narrower vehicle to avoid crashes, a lighter vehicle reducing the severity of vehicle to vehicle crashes, and the fact that our vehicle has a pedestrian protecting front end.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bob, vehicles have also been traditionally designed around the able-bodied, either limiting the mobility options available to people living with disabilities or older adults, or they require enormously expensive retrofitting. So Bob, how could AVs with novel designs improve accessibility or usability by those populations?
Sure. Well, one example that we incorporated in Ollie is an automated ramp. for example, for wheelchairs. And that was incorporated into the base design. You know, there are many vehicles that have, let's say, ramps for wheelchairs, but they're added on later, right? And they're sort of clunky and not very handy. So we have a ramp that slides out from the floor and deploys automatically. It can be deployed by the autonomous kit, because at some point there's not going to be a steward in this vehicle. So how do you operate the ramp, right? So we have software that can recognize when it makes a stop, whether people are in a wheelchair or even if they have crutches. So we can actually sense that and deploy the ramp automatically. Or people can request ahead of time at a certain stop that they're going to need the ramp. Additionally, we have mounting or securement inside the vehicle, so we can tie down the wheelchair. And you know, there are thousands of wheelchairs designs, right? So we have a universal system that will comprehend most of them, right? The other thing I did want to mention, and it's related to the 3D printing, people wonder, how's this thing going to behave when it's made out of, let's say, a high-strength polymer? I would characterize it. So we have crash tested our vehicles. And again, with 3D printing, we can make modifications extremely quickly. There's no tooling involved. So we've developed and improved the crash resistance of the vehicle. So it's comparable to, let's say, a Ford van or a Chevrolet van that can carry 8 or 9 people. So we're very proud of that, and we continue that to improve crash resistance over time.
Absolutely. And actually, while we're on that topic of crashes, and Katie brought it up as well with Pedestrian Safety Month and that importance of protecting vulnerable road users. Amanda, I was wondering if you could also touch on that, on what role new vehicle designs could play in keeping non-vehicle occupants safe.
Absolutely, happy to. One of the beautiful things about doing a ground up vehicle that doesn't have controls for human drivers is there's certain things on the outside of vehicles, like exterior projections. So side view mirrors, for example, are perfectly at height with cyclists' heads or with occupants. And since none of our drivers use mirrors to see where they're going, we can eliminate those things and eliminate one of the potential risks that is out there that can contribute to some of these negative interactions with vulnerable road users. We also have the flexibility with our designs, as Katie pointed out, to be more focused in a lot of ways on what is our interaction with pedestrians should we happen to end up in a situation that we hope never happens, which is an interaction with a pedestrian or a cyclist, by designing the front ends in such a way to be more friendly to those incidents and hopefully reduce the risk of injuries. Something else that we've done at Zoox is that we've thought about how we communicate with other road users. As you may be aware, in typical custom, a human driver and a human pedestrian may execute an unwritten dance of signaling, visually with hand waves, etc. Now that you don't have a human driver inside, how do you take those interactions and leverage those? And so we have come up with a system of sounds as well as lights that we're continuing to explore. But with the sounds, we're able to actually beamform and pinpoint if there's a pedestrian that's standing at the edge of the road or that's entered the road not in a crosswalk. We can send them a sound to sort of get their attention, to try to help them recognize that we're coming. And also for us, we've already recognized they're coming, start planning for them to not take action too, right? So try to grab that awareness so that if someone's not paying attention, we can help them realize that they've stepped out into the road.
Definitely. And as we're thinking about other implications with novel designs, one topic we received a lot of questions from the audience involved the regulatory landscape. So Katie, there are a lot of assumptions that are baked into our current regulatory system about what a vehicle is. What is this current status quo when it comes to that regulation, and how do these type of novel designs depart from that?
Yeah, so we have a federal regulatory framework that's really built around the concept of human-driven cars, right? It's a standard, it's historical. However, and these federal motor vehicle standards called FMVSS were written when AVs are really science fiction. They require things like, as Amanda referred to, reference side view mirrors and other components that really make sense for human-driven cars. But they don't serve a safety purpose in an autonomous vehicle, especially a zero-occupant vehicle like Nuro's that'll never carry a human. So last February, R2 became the first AV to receive an FMVSS exemption from NHTSA. They recognized that components like mirrors and backup cameras didn't make a lot of sense in a vehicle that'll never have a human driver. So the exemption allowed us to operate R2 on public roads without those components. Exemptions are a useful way for NHTSA to learn more about the technology in the short term, but we hope in the long term, their solution to modernize these standards to fully enable the introduction of these new vehicle designs.
Absolutely. And Amanda, what do you think that future regulatory landscape looks like for AVs with such novel designs?
Yeah, absolutely, Tabitha. So, leveraging the couple years that I spent at NHTSA working in safety compliance, enforcing FMVSS, as well as helping to draft FMVSS, I sort of see there's two paths. There's the state level, and there's been some great work done by our companies on vehicle code modernization. So at the state level, there's equipment requirements for things like mirrors and brake pedals and all of those things. And we've successfully gotten legislation updated in California, Nevada, and several other states that recognize that vehicles that are designed without a human driver shouldn't be required to have equipment that is not relevant to the purpose. So that's one piece. And then I think the FMVSS is going to be a long process. If you look at what it takes to update a regulation, it's typically 7 to 10 years by the time the discussion starts until it actually comes into force. And so I think the next 7 to 10 years are going to be quite interesting, and people may not like that time horizon, but I think that's realistic. And so really our goal is, as those changes come, emphasizing the importance of performance-based standards as opposed to design-based standards, so that there's the flexibility for not only our current vehicle, but what's the next vehicle that we do, and what does this continue to evolve and look like as autonomy becomes more prevalent. If you think about the origin of the FMVSS, they came about in 1966 is when they were originally contemplated and didn't come into force till the end of the 60s. Cars had already existed for 60 years at this point. So the design and sort of the function of them had been well established. And so right now we're struggling with, and the agency, I think also, how do you write a regulation for a rapidly evolving industry and a new, novel vehicle that doesn't contemplate a human driver? And so I'm really excited to see what comes over the next couple of years, and really looking forward to partnering with everybody here on this call, as well as the agency, to make that a reality.
Absolutely. Bob, anything else to add there about, what Amanda was just talking about? Or we received a common question of, would your vehicles benefit from a new type of vehicle classification or designation?
Sure. Well, the regulatory climate is definitely not helpful, right? Especially, in the scheme of things where small, innovative companies, when you compare it, let's say, to the big three. So we have somewhat limited resources, but a large part of my job, spending time up in Washington, D.C., talking to people that sit on various panels that can help us. And when we explain the situation, they all agree, they nod their head, and, they love what we're trying to do. But, as Amanda said, the regulations we really need are a long ways off, just because of the way the system handles. Now, we do operate on a exemption basis. To me, that's workable, so we can run on public roads and learn, but it's not the ideal thing, right? Vehicles like this shouldn't need an exemption. So we do need a ground up regulation that fits these vehicles. And there's a couple of issues. As soon as we say we're autonomous vehicles, people think, oh yeah, the autonomous part is the critical thing. But it's not, it's also the core vehicle. When you look at these vehicles, as Amanda said, there are dozens of things that do not comply with current FMVSS. So we're fighting this thing on two fronts, and it's a major effort, and we need to level the playing field because, again, people like General Motors, and don't get me wrong, I came from General Motors, but they have the resources to really work on this. And smaller companies like us, struggle. So when I say level the playing field, we need to be able to be heard and understood, right? So I'll leave it at that. I could talk about this a long time, but I won't.
That's great.
Yeah.
We have a couple minutes left. So in classic PAVE fashion, I want to turn it to a couple of questions about education. Obviously, part of PAVE's mission is to try to increase people's understanding and interest in how automated vehicles might fit into a broader conversation about the future of transportation. So I'd love to hear from all of you. I'll go one by one, but what you think the value of people learning and knowing about novel designs is in understanding that broader AV and transportation landscape. Katie, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think I think primarily from a stakeholder and sort of regulatory perspective. So I'll start there and maybe different in a different way than my colleagues might. But I think about sort of, I'm going to call regulatory consciousness, which is oftentimes when people think about autonomous vehicles, they may not think about a occupantless bot, and yet we have one that delivers goods, and it doesn't have a person in it. It's not a ride-hailing vehicle. So I think when you look at in terms of regulatory consciousness, I mean that when people are drafting bills, when they're talking about drafting rules, when they're thinking about things like goods delivery or food safety standards, that they're thinking about these sorts of vehicles that don't have have a unique challenge, and that we don't have we don't have a driver, and so traditional definitions don't apply to us. So we often work through some of those issues at the state level, and in terms of maybe outdated regulations that consider a driver or automobile, whereas they're not considering a bot. So I think that's a really important awareness.
Absolutely. Amanda?
Yeah, absolutely. Educational is going to be critical for the success of autonomous vehicles, bar none. If people don't understand how they work, how to use them, they're not going to use them. It's kind of like when it took us 10 years to get my mom to take on a smartphone, because she was afraid of it. And I think you're going to see some of that hesitancy. You're going to have two, I think, distinct groups. You're going to have the early adopters that we cannot get this to them soon enough, and they are ready and they are excited and super thrilled. And then we're going to have everybody else that's a little bit cautious, because much like when we transitioned from the horse and carriage to the Model T, or pick your choice of early internal combustion engines, there was a huge learning curve for the populace. And so I think doing events like this, where we can start to get the message out about, we're thinking about safety, we're thinking about our customers, we're thinking about the rest of the environment, we're trying to make the world better by reducing congestion, pollution, and serving all of those needs. And really just that education factor, so that people understand what to expect and what we can deliver and what we're working to still deliver, and where we hope to go in the future.
Beautifully said. And Bob, you want to bring us home?
Sure. Well, obviously the autonomous part is a real challenge, right? But I think, the education system is pretty progressive, and I think we're finding more and more engineers now that are familiar with sensors and so on. One area we still struggle with is, again, the base vehicle design. We love to hire engineers and designers from the auto industry, but they approach things a bit differently, right? That are not necessarily correct for a shuttle. So when we have a ground up design, the designers have to have that mentality. They have to think outside the box, and they're not going to design a door for a minivan that works for a shuttle. And also, certainly weight is a major consideration for vehicles like this. So I'm not going to get into the AV part of it, but the base design is also very critical. Finding people that are knowledgeable about new technology, like 3D printing, right? Where do you find those people? So it's a little different aspect that we've talked about. So base design is also very critical. And then servicing these vehicles, finding service people out in the field that can hit the ground running is extremely difficult.
Great. Well, that takes us to our 30-minute mark. But this has been a fantastic conversation on reimagining vehicle design. Katie, Amanda, Bob, thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Thanks so much. I had a lovely time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And a big thank you to our live audience, and especially all of you who submitted questions in advance. It's really helpful in terms of putting the conversation together. So if you'd like to follow up with PAVE or one of the panelists on this topic, please reach out to us via our website contact form at pavecampaign.org, or just reply to your registration email. We'll also be posting the full video recording of this discussion on our YouTube channel and website later this afternoon. Follow us on any social media at PAVE Campaign to see that as soon as it's released. Thank you.
Thank you.